Get to JCPenney today. We're here and have all the things you're looking for, like the latest fall fashions for you and your family, from trusted brands like Arizona and Liz Claiborne to exclusive collections like Libby Edelman and Project Runway, and everything for your home, from stylish decor to brand name appliances. We also have an exclusive in-store offer just for you. Get 20% off any way you pay on select items throughout the store. Click here to download or print your coupon today. Make the smart move to JCPenney. That's getting your pennies worth. Coupon required, valid 9/15 to 10/29, in-store only on select items. Appliances and some other exclusions apply. See store for details.
Everybody, you're listening live to United Public Radio Network. This is the Voice of the People radio program. This is a Tuesday night edition, coming to you live from an undisclosed location in southern Mississippi. We're just on with ye old headquarters there at United Public Radio Network. Thanks to Joe in studio control pulling us on the air. We're going to just jump into a couple of headlines. If you hadn't been paying attention to what's been going on with the news, because you might be, I don't know, watching something like the World Series on television or thinking about it, who knows? But in political events in the United States, the U.S. top court, the Supreme Court of the United States, has dismissed the state of Hawaii's challenge to a Trump travel ban. Okay. The U.S. Supreme Court on Tuesday formally dropped plans to hear the last remaining challenge to an earlier version of President Donald Trump's travel ban targeting several Muslim-majority countries and a ban on refugees. But a fight over the legality of his latest restrictions still could reach the 9 justices. The High Court said it will not hear the case brought by the state of Hawaii over the bans, which have expired and have been replaced with revised policies. President Trump's 120-day ban on refugees ended today, on Tuesday, and is set to be replaced by a new set of restrictions. 2 federal courts have blocked President Trump's new ban targeting people from 8 countries. President Trump's third set of travel restrictions, and the issue could find its way back to the Supreme Court on an appeal. Now, the Supreme Court on October 10th disposed of the first of 2 travel ban cases brought by the American Civil Liberties Union and others in the state of Maryland after President Trump's earlier 90-day ban on people entering the United States from 6 predominantly Muslim countries expired on September 24th. It was replaced with a modified, open-ended ban involving 8 countries. So it has gone from the presidential executive orders expiring, for example, the one I just mentioned on September 24th, and the refugee ban, which ended today. It has gone from being time restricted to being open-ended. So the open-ended ban is probably the one that's going to ultimately end up actually having the best possibility for consideration by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court justices had been scheduled to hear arguments in the 2 cases consolidated on the 10th of October. Among the issues raised by challengers was whether the travel ban discriminated against Muslims in violation of the United States Constitution's prohibition on the government favoring or disfavoring a particular religion. The same arguments are being used against the new ban. President Trump has said the restrictions were needed to prevent terrorism in the United States. The expired ban had targeted people from Iran, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, and Sudan. Now, when you look at it, all of these countries, possibly with the exception of Libya, is either involved in an active civil war or they're involved in an actual form of belligerent activity with their neighbors on their borders. This includes Iran and their actions, including their support of the military efforts that are ongoing in Iraq. Ironically, you would not have thought back during the Iran-Iraq War, for example, from 1980 to 1989, that Iran would ever have any kind of military support presence for anything in Iraq, Libya, who has had issues since the toppling of the dictatorship of Muammar Gaddafi. Syria has been an ongoing, complete and total mess of a civil war, which actually some political experts might break that down and say that Syria is actually a situation where you have 6 or 7 independent conflicts going at the same time. Of course, if you're aware of what's been happening in Yemen, um, it is a total basket case of a civil war, which is being supported by on one side uh, of the government supported by the Saudi Arabians, which our Secretary of State was just visiting there. I'm sure that was one of the things that was on the table for Secretary Rex Tillerson. Very, very sensitive way of looking at all of those things too, because the United States has a very valuable relationship with Saudi Arabia when it comes to the export and import by the United States of oil. The same thing goes with Iran and all of the complications from Iran's recent nuclear deal, which was made under the previous Obama administration. The new ban on President Trump's executive order removed Sudan from the list and blocked people from Chad and North Korea and certain government officials from Venezuela from entering the United States. Now, a little bit about that is that the Chadian government had said that they were told by the United States State Department that they were supposed to be supplying visa forms in paper, and one of the complaints was that the Chad government had run out of paper to submit the forms, which may be why the president's latest executive order decided that Chad was just not in compliance with whatever regulations the United States had set forth on that traveling system. Of course, they really didn't like the idea of being lumped in there with North Korea. Okay, so the new ban, to wrap this up again so you can follow it with me here, the new ban removed Sudan from the list. Now, Sudan was, until the breakup with South Sudan, which became another country. Okay, and if you're thinking about where is Sudan on the map, Sudan is south of Egypt. So think Egypt, think south of Egypt, and then the southern portion of Sudan, which would have been Upper Egypt in the ancient days, broke off and has become its own country. There's been a state of ongoing civil unrest and civil war there as well. Although there was a couple of years of intermediate, you might say, peace. It's kind of questionable. It depends on who you ask, quite seriously. So it's not like the State Department gave the president a list and said, pick, and then the president used his own personal foibles to pick who these countries were, and had any personal reason for it. This is all done, under the auspices of Department of State and what's been, known to be happening with all of these countries. Of course, the people in Chad did not like being lumped in with North Korea. That possibly created a situation and a dynamic going on there where the United States has sent military advisors within the last couple of months into Niger, because of the problems with the Nigerian government. And we had an incident where there were several U.S. service personnel who were serving in advisory capacities and out on patrols, including some service members from Chad. And what happened was, when the Trump administration announced the new travel ban, the government of Chad took offense and removed Chadian military support from the effort. And that's a multinational effort that's going on in the nation of Niger, which is Nigeria's eastern neighbor. In case you're wondering how that comes about, you have Nigeria and you have Niger. So to the east, and covering a much larger area. But Chad is well known for providing tactical and support personnel for these conflicts that have been plaguing the countries in Africa over the last 25 years. And so they were known to have removed some personnel from the area, possibly a huge political mistake made by some people in the Trump administration, although publicly we have yet to see any definitive proof of that. It has been speculated that because of this paperwork situation, that is what caused the issuance of noncompliance with the Chadian government and not being able to supply the United States State Department with documents that they requested, would then create an untenable or not too pleasant military situation in Niger with the American military advisors, caused the Chadian soldiers to leave the area. Of course, North Korea is kind of one of those things that you're not really going to question why there has been a travel ban put in place with North Korea and certain government officials from Venezuela. Venezuela, of course, having that referendum to reformulate their constitution. The United States is sort of looking at the situation with the gentleman that is in charge of the government in Venezuela as if it is a not exactly representative, democratically elected government there. You can kind of squeeze into the dictator label, if you will, on part of the administration. So if the new restrictions go into effect, they could block tens of thousands of potential immigrants and visitors to the United States. This not only covers travel ban, not only covers immigrants, it also covers people wanting to visit the United States under whichever purpose. Usually they would be asked by immigration and customs officials if the purpose of their visit was for business or for pleasure, for tourism. President Trump had promised as a candidate in 2016 a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States. So people in the mainstream media are kind of taking that and running with it as to why. They're saying, well, the president's doing this just because he made a campaign promise to keep Muslims out of the United States, because he said that President Obama and President Bush really had not done very well in that category. And supposedly the electorate base that voted President Trump into office maniacally and rabidly supports things like the travel ban. I don't think that the people who voted for Donald Trump for president are as mindless as the mainstream media likes to try to make them out, though. That's my personal opinion. And, please remember that the opinions expressed by the host of Voice of the People Radio are not those of United Public Radio Network or its ownership. We're just doing our own op-ed here, and the station doesn't necessarily have to agree with me. If you disagree with anything that I say here on the show, of course, you can always say that you do by emailing voiceofthepeopleradio@gmail.com. That's voiceofthepeopleradio@gmail.com. I do read those emails, and if you like to, you can catch us on Saturdays. We are on the air from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday afternoons with Voice of the People Radio here on United Public Radio Network. And, of course, as always, if you'd like to try to call in, the station call-in number is 504-273-7379. Again, it's 504-273-7379. But we cannot always guarantee that the phone company is going to let the call go through. Sometimes we have some problems with that. And then sometimes we have folks that are listening to a pre-recorded program on another station, and they happen to call in during the live programs, and they're on a completely different topic because the station, of course, has the same call-in number. So if you're ever listening to a United Public Radio Network program and you don't necessarily want to call and talk to me about what's been going on with this Trump travel ban, but you'd like to talk to another host like Michael Angley, go ahead and call it number 504-273-7337, and it works whenever any of us are on live here on United Public Radio Network. I mean, it's just, it's crazy, but it happens. And sometimes we get the occasional call, from somebody who has been listening to another program, perhaps even from as far back as 10 or 15 years ago, and want to talk about the experience that they had that is mirrors or is darn well parallel to what has been happening to the guests being interviewed on the other program. So always a load of fun doing the live radio broadcast here. Is one of the other crazy thing that's going on in the news is as I sit here and I struggle with my devices, but we have had the it's been almost a year after the election, and Donald Trump was elected kind of in a surprise. Perhaps his campaign knew that taking the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania was potentially going to put him over the top with the Electoral College, and perhaps it was a total surprise. But what's crazy about it is nearly a year after President Trump's election, both sides, the Democrats and the Republicans, think that they're losing. That's just bizarre. Other headlines, things that are going on that you might want to check out if you're in front of your computer. The Clinton campaign, the Hillary Clinton campaign, and the Democratic National Committee paid for research that led to a Russia dossier. So that is still also an ongoing thing. It's just crazy. Then there is this ongoing thing with Paul Corker and President Trump. There is this war of words. Of course, Mr. Corker saying he will not seek re-election for another term, and so he has decided to take his gloves off and has decided to try to take on the president for what it's worth going into. And I assume it's not going to end with the 2018 midterm elections, which are coming up, where, of course, certain number of members of Congress and a number of U.S. Senate seats are up for grabs every 2 years. We have a rotation in and out of seats which are up for re-election. In between those, we have our elections, which are on the federal level for the president every 4 years. And so that kind of balances it out because our senators serve 6-year terms. So sometimes your senator will be up for election during a presidential election year, and other years they won't. That's why we call them midterms, because 2018, November 2018, will be the midterm for President Trump's first term in office. In other words, he will effectively have been voted in as president-elect for 2 years when the elections are held in November of 2018. Of course, we haven't gotten to 2017's November elections for all kinds of things going on across the country, but people tend to focus on what is going on in the near-term future instead of sometimes what's happening right now. It's just very, very bizarre. Hurricane Harvey has claimed another victim about 2 months after making landfall in Texas. A 31-year-old man died last week after being diagnosed with a rare flesh-eating bacterial infection known as necrotizing fasciitis. The Galveston County Health District announced this yesterday. The man has been identified as Josue Zurita, according to KHOU television in Houston, Texas, and he was helping repair several homes which were damaged by flooding from Harvey. Mr. Zurita went to the hospital on the 10th of October, and had a seriously infected wound on his upper left arm and was diagnosed with necrotizing fasciitis, according to the Galveston County Health District. In an obituary for the Galveston-based Carnes Brothers Funeral Home's website, Mr. Zarita was called a loving father and hardworking carpenter who moved to the United States from Mexico to help his family and remained to help with the rebuilding after Hurricane Harvey. Mr. Zarita's death follows that of Nancy Reed, a 77-year-old Houston area woman who died in September from necrotizing fasciitis related to the Hurricane Harvey floodwaters. J.R. Atkins, a former first responder, also contracted a flesh-eating bacterial infection but survived. He had been kayaking through floodwaters to check on neighbors affected by the hurricane. We are surprised. We saw 3 of cases of necrotizing fasciitis in the region, but given the exposure to all the construction and potential injuries that people would have, it shouldn't be surprising. It's well within what we would expect given those numbers, said Dr. Philip Keyser, the Galveston County Local Health Authority. Yet such infections as necrotizing fasciitis are very rare. Since 2010, about 7 to 1,100 cases occur each year in the United States overall, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Now, several types of bacteria can cause necrotizing fasciitis, according to the National Institutes of Health. Such an infection can spread quickly and kills the body's soft tissue, especially if it infects a wound that's not properly cared for, Dr. Keyser said. The infection can also become lethal within a short amount of time. Basically, Dr. Keyser said what happens is you get some kind of break in the skin, and in that area between the skin and the muscle, it's fairly open space where the bacteria can grow. I've seen these things spread out over hours. Even in one case, as I was examining a patient, I could see the red spread in the minutes I was examining him, and that's the real danger to it, Dr. Keyser said. As it spreads, it's going up the space between the muscle and the skin, and as it does that, it kills all the nerves and the blood vessels can clot. So it's very dangerous. To prevent such deadly infections, proper wound care is key, according to Dr. Keyser and the Center for Disease Control. Keep open wounds covered with clean, dry bandages until they heal, especially if you're working in floodwaters, and avoid contact with natural bodies of water if you have an open wound. Don't delay treating minor non-infected wounds, and wash your hands often with soap and water. Also, if you notice any redness or swelling of a wound, or if you have a fever, seek medical attention. That goes for whether or not you were going around trying to help people as a responder in a disaster, or you simply have cut your leg or your arm or your fingers on a rusty hand tool or a nail or anything like that. Don't put off getting it treated. If you don't remember when the last time you had a tetanus shot or had any kind of boosters for those sorts of things, get that stuff taken care of, because you don't want to end up being the next item on the news where you ended up with a case of flesh-eating bacteria. It's just sort of simply almost out of a need to not be publicly embarrassed about it. There's no reason to think that this gentleman would have been anything but applauded for his efforts publicly, and it is sad that he ended up losing his life after he was a volunteer and such good service to his community. But the flesh-eating bacteria, the microorganism, the little bugs that want to get in your body, they don't care about the good works that you're doing out and helping other people. They just look at you and in their own single-celled organism way, see you as a potential source of food. And that's so whether or not it's a bacteria or a lion that's escaped from the zoo, in the purview of both of those things, you are what's for dinner. Speaking of other medical weirdness, Cubans deny any role in the United States diplomats' mystery ailments. This has been going on for some time. It's another one of those weird medical items. In Havana, On exclusive interviews with NBC News, Cuban officials forcefully denied that the Cuban government is to blame for the mysterious ailments that have affected 24 American diplomats and plunged relations with the United States into a crisis level. President Donald Trump has publicly blamed the government in Havana for the reported symptoms, which range from hearing loss and nausea to memory problems and mild traumatic brain injury. Mild traumatic brain injury. But the Cubans leading the probe have emphatically rejected that. Colonel Ramirez, chief of diplomatic security for the Cuban Interior Ministry, had told NBC News that I can guarantee you that this is completely false. U.S. officials believe some kind of sonic weapon was used in a sonic weapon, a device using some kind of sound, whether you can hear the sound or not. Hypersonic is something you cannot hear, however, it could physically affect you. The U.S. officials believe some kind of sonic weapon was used to attack 24 embassy staffers and relatives of those staffers between the fall of 2016 and August of 2017. But the Cubans claim they don't even have that technology, and United States experts say they don't know of technology that would produce the reported symptoms. Cuba has never produced these type of weapons, said Lieutenant Colonel Jorge Alazo, head of the criminal division of the Interior Ministry for Cuba. The State Department pulled 60% of its workers out of the embassy in Havana 3 weeks ago, and soon after expelled 15 Cuban diplomats from Washington, D.C., or nearly two-thirds of the nation of Cuba's Washington, D.C. staff. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said the decision was made due to Cuba's failure to take appropriate steps to protect our diplomats. The Cubans, who took the extraordinary step of inviting the Federal Bureau of Investigation to Havana when the U.S. first reported the incidents, say they're doing everything they can to figure out what's behind the ailments to these U.S. Embassy personnel and their family members. This investigation has involved nearly 2,000 people, said Mr. Ramirez, including law enforcement agents and the best scientists in our country. They have examined rooms in 2 hotels where American Embassy staffers lived, scoured a neighborhood where many had homes, interviewed 300 neighbors, and conducted dozens of medical exams to see if others outside the diplomatic cadre were affected. Not even one person was sick, Dr. Manuel Villar said. He noted, however, that the United States has refused to share the medical records of the diplomats or let the Cubans speak to any U.S. doctors. The Cubans also say the State Department has not permitted them into the homes of U.S. diplomats to conduct tests. The Cubans also analyzed air and soil samples. They looked into whether insects could be the culprit and considered a range of toxic chemicals and the possibility of electromagnetic waves. But from the Cuban perspective, nothing so far has explained why U.S. diplomats began suffering health symptoms, some of them after what have been described as acoustic disturbances. Here's one for Michael Engel. You might want to go to Cuba and try to investigate that there, buddy. We've been unable to find anything to prove the situation exists or ever existed, Mr. Alazo said. There is audio of the strange high-pitched sounds that some of the diplomats reportedly heard, but a document provided to the NBC News staff by the Cuban government says that the recording did not capture acoustic levels damaging to health. And American experts told NBC News that they know of no technology that would explain the symptoms. There's never been any physiological kind of response that reflects the symptoms that are reported or that have ever been caused by sound waves of any type, said Joe Pompey, a former MIT researcher who was the founder and president of Holosonics, a sound technology company. Unless they had transducers in the bathtub and had the diplomats submerge their heads for a long time, it's just not possible, Mr. Pompey added. Despite Cuba's intense investigation and impassioned disavowals, the episode has frayed relations with the United States just 2 years after the Obama administration had restored diplomatic ties. In a classified briefing for members of Congress, administration officials did not point a finger at Cuba. U.S. officials have told NBC News, but President Trump has cast blame in that direction at least twice. President Trump said in late September they did some bad things as the State Department began its drawdown of personnel. 2 weeks later, he told reporters, I do believe Cuba is responsible. I do believe that. In Havana, Cuban officials dismissed speculation that hardliners on the communist island orchestrated attacks in an attempt to freeze the defrosting of relations between the two countries. As for the possibility that a third country like Russia wanted to cause trouble, Mr. Ramirez has said, we don't have definitive answers yet, but Cuba has never allowed, nor would we ever allow our territory to be used in this way. The FBI has met with the Cubans this week to discuss the situation. Cuba says that despite the war of words, it's hoping for more cooperation that could unravel the mystery. Dr. VR has said, let us do it together and find out what's happening. Now, those of you who are old enough or have seen enough movies also remember the Cuban Missile Crisis during the administration of President John F. Kennedy. So it's kind of ironic that a modern Cuban diplomat would say we don't have definitive answers, but Cuba has never allowed, nor would we ever allow our territory to be used in this way. However, Cuba historically has been known to have permitted the disposition of weapons of mass destruction, meaning nuclear missiles, to be based definitively on the island of Cuba by the former, Soviet Union, the former government of Russia. Some might disagree with that statement, saying that it's the former form of government for Russia. However, in the previous incarnation politically, Russia's involvement in that situation in the Cuban Missile Crisis cannot be questioned. However, now, 2017, it is up for question as to whether or not the Russians had anything to do with the illness of these U.S. diplomats. And to me, it seems like it's an awful lot of trouble to go through just to give some people some sickness, some headache and nausea, when you could find better ways to do that. But I mean, who knows? We've also had the expulsion of Russian diplomats and the expulsion of U.S. diplomats from Russia over the past 6 months with the Trump administration. So booting diplomats from other countries out has become sort of a mild form of entertainment for people running these different State Departments. Of course, the people whose lives are being disrupted, even though they are there in service to their country, probably do not appreciate when these things become over political and diplomats are being kicked out of the country in an effort to just kind of save face or show force, depending on which side you are looking at it from. Diplomats are afforded a level of diplomatic immunity when they are being hosted by the country, such as Cuba. Those diplomats are to be treated with a respect that the Cubans would expect to have their own citizens treated with, and they also have the capability to avoid being prosecuted for a large number of what we might call misdemeanor offenses based on differences between customs. It's frowned upon for you to take advantage of a diplomatic immunity in a given situation, but diplomats are afforded certain amenities, such as being able to park their car in a place where they may not be towed by the police because they have some form of official business to attend to. albeit you don't regularly see a diplomat abusing that privilege and then, let's say, driving around New Orleans, parking in handicapped designated parking spots because they happen to have a diplomatic license plate. That would just lead to very touchy situations with local law enforcement. And of course, an officer would have to, be there and not just run the tag and say, "Oh, diplomatic immunity." There still has to be, some sort of confirmation with the driver, or the diplomat in question to make sure that what was going on was that the parking space in question was being legitimately used. And of course, those type of incidents occur far more often in places like Washington, D.C. than they do in beautiful New Orleans, Louisiana, but it can happen. So diplomatic immunity, it'd be nice. I'm sure Joe Montaldo wished that he would have some diplomatic immunity when he can't find a really good parking space. Oh my goodness, it's just craziness. And after, I don't know, it's so bizarre. It's really, very, very hard to say, when things are going right with the news media and their coverage of things in the last 10 months. It's almost as if the nation likes to say that the news media went into a state of shock, after the election in November of 2016 of President Trump. So, it's just very bizarre. But here we go again. The GOP has opened new Obama-era inquiries, and of course, that is going to upset Democratic members of Congress. It's just so crazy. Vice President Mike Pence has once again been called upon in his role as vice president. The vice president of the United States is the president pro tempore of the United States Senate. When there is a 50-50 tie, there are 100 senators. There are 2 senators for each of the 50 states. Whenever there is a tie, the president of the Senate, who is the sitting vice president of the United States, is called upon in these situations to make a tie-breaking vote, either yes or no, given whatever particular issue is on the floor. Vice President Pence broke the tie to nix the Obama-era consumer arbitration rule. Now, he joined with Senate Republicans to nix a controversial Consumer Bureau rule banning companies from using forced settlements to resolve disputes with customers. Senators voted 50-50 on the resolution of disapproval. GOP Senators Lindsey Graham of South Carolina and John Kennedy from Louisiana joined with Democrats to oppose cutting the Obama-era rule. Vice President Pence then took over the presiding officer's chair and cast the tie-breaking vote to make the total 51-50. Republicans are using the Congressional Review Act, which gives them 60 legislative days to repeal an executive branch rule after it's finalized with a simple majority. Simple majority in this case being 51 to 50. Okay, or in another case, a regular vote happened in the Senate without the vice president having to cast the vote. It would be, let's say, 51 to 49. That would be a simple majority. So they have 60 legislative days to repeal the executive branch rule after it is finalized with that 51 vote majority. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's rule would ban banks and credit card companies from using clauses in customer contracts that protect the credit card companies and banks from class action lawsuits. The so-called forced arbitration clauses require customers, meaning you, general public, to resolve any disputes with the bank or the credit card company through a third-party mediator, and bans you as a consumer from suing the company. Now, Democrats have argued that nixing or eliminating this rule would be a boon to Wall Street and a financial institution, jump up and down party, who have warned that the regulation could force them to spend money on costly lawsuits. Our job is to look out for the people whom we serve, not look out for Wells Fargo, not to look out for Equinox, not to look out for Wall Street banks, not to look out for corporations who scam consumers. So Senator Sherrod Brown, Democrat of Ohio, said ahead of the vote, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Senator Sherrod Brown might have meant to say Equifax, the financial company who is known for having their information hacked and putting the information of 148 million American consumers at risk on the dark web. So I think Senator Brown meant to say Equifax. Okay, if he did mean to say Equinox, maybe somebody at the financial Equinox service firm needs to get involved about that. Democrats on today spoke on the Senate floor for hours against this rule. Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, aimed her appeals to quash the rule directly at President Trump. President Trump, Mike Pence works for you. You've gone on and on and on about how strong you are, about how tough you are, and about how you are going to stand up to Wall Street, she said. Senator Sherrod Brown, wrapping up the Democrats' floor speeches, noted that Vice President Pence had just arrived in the Capitol. The vice president only shows up in this body when the rich and powerful need him, Senator Brown said. The rule forces companies to write arbitration clauses in ways that would not prevent consumers, meaning you, from joining class action lawsuits. Republicans and business groups have criticized the rule, claiming it would help no one but trial lawyers. Now, Senator John Cornyn, a Republican of Texas, fired back that Senate Minority Leader Charles Schumer, Democrat of New York, and Democrats are trying to cry crocodile tears. Not everybody can afford to be O.J. Simpson and hire the very best lawyers in America and try a case for weeks on end at a cost of millions of dollars, he added. The Treasury Department and Comptroller of the Currency have also criticized the rule, warring with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau Director Richard Cordray and top Democratic lawmakers in op-eds, opinions published in newspapers, and interviews. A Treasury Department analysis of the rule released earlier this week argued that the measure would lead to 3,000 more class action lawsuits over the next 5 years. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau said that the Treasury Department's report rehashes industry arguments that were solidly refuted in the final rule. Tuesday's vote today was widely expected to come down to a handful of moderate or populist GOP senators. In addition to Senator Kennedy and Graham, GOP Senators Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, and Rob Portman of Ohio did not say ahead of time how they would vote. So now you know the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say, and Vice President Pence has been called upon several times during this first year of the Obama administration to go to the Senate floor, and he was doing his job. So I would have to respectfully disagree with Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, saying that the vice president only shows up when the rich and powerful beckon him, unless, of course, he's talking about those rich and powerful being those 100 members of the United States Senate. Because I'm pretty sure that compared to you and me, average Joe public, the Senate consists of 100 very rich and powerful people. I'm not sure that very many people in our listening audience make the same level of salary as a United States Senator, along with that lovely Senate health care package, which differs very greatly from what's available to the general public with Obamacare. It's just nuts. Okay, the whole thing. And we were talking, while the station was on rollover from Michael Angley in the previous program about what goes on with President Trump and the plan to build the wall to keep the illegal immigration numbers down, and yet we have crime beyond that, which goes on in America, beyond people coming through America's borders, whether they're the border at the north with Canada, which is a very long, unprotected, unwalled, unfenced border, America's border with Canada also in very populous areas like in the Vancouver and Washington state area, where the Coast Guard is always very busy trying to keep people from illegally coming into Washington state, and it's not just the Mexican border, folks. You also have people coming in at the Great Lakes and people coming in, from Florida and in the Gulf Coast states. It is not unheard of to have the Coast Guard picking up people who are trying to get into the United States from other countries. And many of these cases end up, unfortunately, very, very bad situations for those people trying to migrate to the United States on small boats, especially from places like Haiti, where the Haitians they don't have a lot of really good boats that are willing to take people who are desperate to get out of a bad situation across the Gulf and into the United States. But when you look at it, sometimes you could say that the state of Louisiana has a problem when it comes to the occasional cycles of illegal migrants from islands in the Caribbean. And given what has gone on over the last couple of months with the hurricanes and everything, we probably have not seen the end of our hurricane season potentially, and not seen the end of the illegal migrant issue as well. It's just something that's not talked about very much in the mainstream media. It's because of the the negativity of it, and when you have a small boat that shows up, and what has happened is somebody has executed these poor people, and their bodies have been left. And the way they're left, crime examiners look at it, and the outcome of the investigation says it was execution style. Of that, it's you can't really draw too many conclusions with that. On the world stage, we are seeing a situation where there is civil disruption in Iraq. The Kurds, who control a large amount of oil in Iraq, are in the midst of creating a situation which might be looked at as a potential broad-scale Iraqi civil war, controlling the export of large amounts of oil, which the rest of the Iraqi economy is dependent upon for, of course, making out their budget and their way to pay their soldiers who are going into areas which are held by Kurdish ethnic groups. And the Kurdish ethnic groups have voted recently, a vote which the United States, Turkey, and other countries do not agree with the Kurds wanting to become a separate state. So a little bit of political irony there as well. Everyone remembering when the Iraqis went to the polls to vote, and the women even came out with purple thumbs because they were inking their thumbprints and using those as a form of audit, with the secret balloting in process and the Iraqis having a democratic election. And now, we see 15 years on that the Iraqi federal government is having to go in and is under orders to seize control of these oil resources, because there has been a vote by the Kurdish ethnic minority in the country overall, and yet the population of majority in the area where the oil fields are wanting to have regional autonomy in government. So the United States, on one hand, coming up with the Iraqis being given the right to freely express their opinions and vote for the first time in recent history, and then the United States coming down on the heavy-handed side and disagreeing with the Kurdish minority, wanting to have independence from the federal government in Iraq. So that is something else to sort of keep your eyes on in the coming days. This is an ongoing uh, situation there, which has ramifications for everyone because we have people in the region. We're fighting ISIS in the region. Iran is in Iraq helping the Iraqis fight ISIS in the region, and the economy of the region is dependent on the flow of oil. I mean, it's just nuts. The leaders of Iraq's autonomous region of Kurdistan have proposed holding off acting on their September independence referendum in an effort to act responsibly in order to prevent further violence in the face of the Iraqi government's military response to the vote. As Iraq and Kurdistan are faced with grave and dangerous circumstances, we are all obliged to act responsibly in order to prevent further violence and clashes between Iraqi and Peshmerga forces. Peshmerga is the ethnic group within the Kurdish section of Iraq that's controlling the area, the thing that is now in dispute. And think of them like you would a local militia group, said the statement from the Kurdistan regional government. Iraqi troops alongside Iran-backed Shia paramilitaries turned on their former Kurdish allies in the battle against ISIS in response to this voted referendum, which overwhelmingly favored the Kurds breaking away from Iraq. Earlier in October, Iraqi government troops quickly took key areas of the autonomous region, including the oil-rich city of Kirkuk. The statement, which was dated on October 24th, suggested an immediate ceasefire and a halt to all military operations in the Kurdistan region, along with a freeze on the referendum results and the commencement of dialogue between the Kurdish and Iraqi administrations. The Iraqi federal government has not yet responded to the Kurdistan regional government's proposal. Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi said on Monday, yesterday, that his soldiers were told to respect Kurdish citizens, but he wanted to make clear that the authority rested with the central Iraqi government. He said, when we entered Kirkuk, we sent a clear message that citizens should be treated respectfully, but there should be a federal authority in Iraq. So this is ongoing. And the confusing part about all of this is that both Iraq and the Kurds are critical U.S. allies in an oil-rich and strategically important region, with the Kurds providing what's widely seen as the most capable fighting force in the battle against the terror group of ISIS. The Kurdish regional government statement comes just days after Secretary of State Rex Tillerson made an unannounced visit to Iraq with the express purpose of shoring up rifts between the Iraqi government and the breakaway province. We are concerned and a bit saddened by the recent differences that have emerged between the Kurdistan regional government and Iraqi central government, Secretary Tillerson said as he met President Abadi on Monday. We have friends both in Baghdad and we have friends in Erbil, and we can encourage both parties to enter into discussion and dialogue. Now, more than 92% of the roughly 3 million people who cast valid ballots in the autonomous region referendum in Kurdistan voted yes to independence, according to the official results announced by the Kurdish Electoral Commission at the end of September. The vote has been criticized by American, British, and Turkish governments. However, the regional government has determined that peace is, for the time being at least, preferable to bloodshed. Clashes have caused damage to both sides and could lead to continuous bloodshed, inflicting pain and social unrest among different components of Iraqi society. This statement from the Kurdistan regional government. So there you go, folks. We'll try to keep an eye on that for you. Please do tune in on Saturday afternoon, as you will be able to join us again for Voice of the People Radio, coming to you live from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday. I think that Michael Angley guy is going to be coming on the station too.
Get to JCPenney today. We're here and have all the things you're looking for, like the latest fall fashions for you and your family, from trusted brands like Arizona and Liz Claiborne to exclusive collections like Libby Edelman and Project Runway, and everything for your home, from stylish decor to brand name appliances. We also have an exclusive in-store offer just for you. Get 20% off any way you pay on select items throughout the store. Click here to download or print your coupon today. Make the smart move to JCPenney. That's getting your pennies worth. Coupon required, valid 9/15 to 10/29, in-store only on select items. Appliances and some other exclusions apply. See store for details.